Alright guys, it is time for your first Going After Cacciato key points lecture. This lecture is over chapters 1 through 6, chapters that you've been working on in class this week. This is going to be a fairly talk-heavy lecture, so make sure you're taking good notes. These notes will be checked, and there's also an opportunity for extra credit in the middle of this presentation, so make sure you're paying attention as well. We have 6 more slides we're going to look at, each slide over one chapter with my key points, some questions, and just some information that I think is going to be worth you guys knowing later on. Let's get started. Chapter 1, Going After Cacciato. This is our chapter that ties in with chapter 46 as well. It's the beginning of our story. Third Squad is pursuing Cacciato as he goes AWOL. This is interesting to think about because we still don't know why he's going AWOL. All we get is that he has already left, he has planned it out, and he is gone. But we don't necessarily know what has led him to that decision. So that's something we're going to be talking about and thinking about in the upcoming weeks. Another thing that's interesting in Chapter 1 is that Lieutenant Corson doesn't even know who Paul Berlin is. That when Paul Berlin introduces himself or says who he was or how he knows that Cacciato left, Corson replies that he thought that he was Vought and is kind of surprised at who Berlin is. This is really interesting because this suggests that Berlin is just nothing special. Like, he's just there. And, you know, Berlin's biggest desire is to be brave, to get that silver star. And he's really not even a good soldier. Like, he's literally just there, not even recognizable. So Third Squad goes after Cacciato. While they're chasing him down, they frequently refer to him in derogatory terms, some of them humorous, some of them fairly offensive, about how dumb he is, and just kind of his general level of intelligence. I don't think Cacciato is really that dumb, and so why do they keep referring to him as dumb? Possibly out of jealousy. This idea that Cacciato is actually kind of brave. He's the guy that picks up Buff's helmet when nobody else wants to. He doesn't really seem to be affected by the war, and so why they refer to him as dumb all the time is kind of interesting. As proof that he's not dumb, he actually lays a fake booby trap, and then Stink is the one who is making fun of him the most, who actually trips that booby trap. It's just a smoke grenade, but if it had been a real grenade, he could have ended up killing several, if not all of them. Which is kind of interesting. Stink constantly refers to him as dumb, but he's the one that trips the booby trap. Kind of makes you wonder who the dumb one really is. There are lots of clues in Chapter 1 that Berlin is desperate to tell a different story. Lots of mentions of why things had to happen this way or if they couldn't have happened a different way. We really start to see, even in the beginning as we look back, that Paul Berlin does not like how this ends. Remember, this whole story is told kind of in past tense, and so even at the start of Chapter 1, Berlin is already wishing that he was somewhere else, that he was not involved in these kinds of things. Chapter 2 is our first observation post chapter. We're told it's just before midnight. For the sake of it, we'll say it's something like, I don't know, 11:55 to 11:58. Just before stroke of midnight. We're told on page 26 that Paul Berlin's only goal is to live long enough to establish goals worth living for still longer. This is a guy who does not have great life ambitions, right? His only goal is to have goals. This says a lot about who Berlin is and kind of the things that he's interested in. That also tells us that he has no interest in dying in the war. He does, as much as he wants to be brave, he's not willing to do what it takes. And this first observation post really sets the tone for reflecting what had happened on the hill, but more importantly, what might happen. And this is where, again, we start to get these clues that Berlin is constructing this story. He frequently talks about what did and what could happen, and possibilities and things like that. And that's where we get our first taste of that in Chapter 2. Chapter 3 is our first fantasy chapter. Remember, anything that says Paris is fantasy. These are chapters that are not real, which means everything that happens in them is made up. It's all things that Paul is telling himself, trying to convince himself that something different could have happened. This is where Harold Murphy turns back. Again, in the fantasy, Berlin has a character say that he doesn't want to go forward. What's interesting is that Paul Berlin is the one who cast the deciding vote about moving on. So we see in his imagination that he is the deciding vote. He's the guy who, again, in his own imagination, is the one who gets to be the person who drives Third Squad forward. We see him wanting to be in that power of position of casting the deciding vote. Murphy turning back is kind of an interesting piece that Berlin is even in his fantasy, is attempting to acknowledge that there would be issues that would arise. You would have characters that wouldn't want to move forward. Chapter 4. There's a lot of stuff in Chapter 4, so hold on. Chapter 4 deals with Berlin's arrival in the war. Remember, that's in June of 68. And again, we're told that Paul Berlin wanted to live. He does not want to die. He's not interested in being brave. He only wants to live. We get this very strange lecture from his corporal, where the corporal just sits down and stares out at the ocean for an hour and then stands up and turns around and says, "That was your first lesson on how to survive this shit. I hope you paid attention." I'm interested into what do you think the corporal's lecture was about? And so here's your extra credit opportunity. What is the meaning of that lecture? The corporal sits down and looks out at the sea for an hour and then tells them that that was their first lecture. What was he trying to tell them? Post a comment on the blog in the comment section for this post. Worthwhile, insightful, creative answers will be considered for extra credit. Remember, simply posting does not guarantee you extra credit. Chapter 4 continues. Their fake practice for a real war is another important thing. They have them throwing fake grenades and shooting fake ammunition and searching fake Viet Cong soldiers, trying to prepare them for a real war. That should kind of strike you as a bad way to prepare for a war, by throwing fake grenades. In the middle of Chapter 4, Berlin remembers camping with his father. It is not a happy memory. As he remembers getting lost and getting confused and being really... Looking back in hindsight, we can see that his father was probably miserable because his son seems kind of incompetent in the forest. But Paul Berlin does remember it. It suggests a lot about his family, and we'll kind of see other clues about his family throughout the rest of the book as well. Paul Berlin then is going towards his cabin or his camp, and he says he smells the first familiar smell of war, which is shit, and the kaibos. While he's sitting on the toilet, he writes this comment that I'm so short I can't see the forest for the trees, which is a way of saying he can't stop focusing on the little things, right? He can't see the whole forest because he's too busy looking at the individual trees. This is interesting because this is the only thing we see Berlin write all book, and so it is important. I think this is a good view into Paul Berlin's character, that he cannot stop focusing on little things, and he can't ever move forward because of that. Chapter 4 also mentions this idea of the formal standard operating procedures versus informal. Third Squad definitely prefers the informal standard operating procedures of blowing up the tunnels before searching them, and this is the start of the conflict with Lieutenant Martin. It is this divide between formal and informal that ends up being the reason why they frag Lieutenant Martin. Chapter 5. Second observation post chapter. It is now 12:20. We're told that hour of the night created distortions on page 45, kind of giving a supernatural kind of feel to this. This is kind of interesting. This time of night is actually something that's called the witching hour, and it has shown up in, first showed up in the Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman. But this idea that between the hours of about 12 and 3, that magical and kind of weird and disturbing things can happen. And so it's very interesting that Paul Berlin is telling his story at night during this time that would be called the witching hour. We know in chapter 5 that it's now November 20th or 25th. We know that Cacciato left in late October. They followed him for 6 or 7 days into early November, which means that it's probably been about 2 weeks since Berlin shoots him. So we're 2 weeks, somewhere between probably 7 and 14 days after this incident, and Paul Berlin is working through dealing with these issues and creating this story during the witching hour. Our last chapter, chapter 6, Detours on the Road to Paris, again, on the road to Paris, so it's a fictional chapter, not real. Stink, when he shoots the water buffalo, calls himself Lash LaRue, Lash L. LaRue, and he says it several times. That name didn't mean anything to me, and I'm guessing it didn't mean anything to you guys either. It is an old TV character who was this old cowboy named Lash LaRue, and he was renowned. He was famous for how well he could shoot and for his pistol work. So Stink makes this really random reference to Lash L. LaRue. I don't know why. It's just kind of a very odd thing for Stink to say. Stink is very proud of shooting the water buffalo. He's very, very happy with himself for doing that too, which is interesting. This is where we also meet Sarkin. Since it's in a fantasy chapter, it's important to know Sarkin is not real. She is fake. She is made up. She is actually made up of a girl that he encountered in a village. We'll see on page 262, these gold hoops in her ears are mentioned in this other little girl that he encounters in a village. So Sarkin is this construct. It's what he wants the Vietnamese people to be like. He wants them to be friendly and to support him. He wants a girl who loves him and understands him. He's made up this fictional girl. What's so deeply ironic is he can't even have a working relationship with a fictional girl, that he still can't end up keeping her, even in his own relationship. Sarkin describes them herself as refugees, as being far from home and having no destination. And this again connects to Third Squad as well. They are both far from home and with no clear destination. They are just following Cacciato into this fantasy land with no real purpose of knowing what's going to happen. And Sarkin says that they will stop being refugees whenever they get to where they are no longer refugees, which is a very complex way of saying that you will only know once you get there, which kind of, again, echoes Third Squad's search for Cacciato. These have been the first 6 chapters of Going After Cacciato. Lots of important things get set up in here. We get our first observation post chapter, our first fictional chapter, and our first taste of what Paul Berlin thought of whenever he first got to the war. Remember, if you're interested in the extra credit, don't forget to post on the blog, and please go take the quiz whenever you finish watching the video. Have a good night.